Hello, and thank you for supporting the Montana Book Festival and joining us here today. This is the People, Places, and Things, but mostly place, writing with location. And so I'm going to welcome our authors here. I'll introduce them right before they read. They're each going to read for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then after everyone has read, we'll do a brief Q&A and open it up to discussions. And so first we have Scott F. Parker, who is the author of Away Home, Oregon Essays from Pelson Books, which came out in 2018. And it is a love letter to Oregon and an ode to living in the present moment. Living for several years in Minnesota, Scott Parker finds himself longing for the Oregon of his youth. He explores this longing by returning to his home state, both over the course of several visits and through the unfolding of memory, to find out what he is capable of understanding about time, home, and himself. And so now we'll welcome Scott.
I'll try to hold the mic and read at the same time. That introduction covered actually some of the things I was going to mention, but I'll say a few words still about what this book is and how it came to be. Several years ago, my wife, who might have to sneak out during this with our son, she and I moved to Minnesota for her to get a master's degree. And the plan was to be there for 2 years. Master's turned into a doctorate, 2 years turned into eventually 6. And it was at that moment that we committed to staying longer that it first occurred to me that Portland, Oregon generally, wasn't an inevitability for me. I might not ever go home. And I had so taken that for granted that it had never crossed my mind that I wouldn't. And at that moment, or over that summer, I started to want to interrogate, what is Oregon? What does it mean to me? And so I started taking these trips back there over the summer, and I would drive around the state for weeks at a time and visit new places and take notes and all this. And I'll read you a quote here from Joan Didion. She wrote, "A place belongs forever to whoever claims it hardest, remembers it most obsessively, wrenches it from itself, shapes it, renders it, loves it so radically that he remakes it in his own image." She's talking about Hemingway in Kilimanjaro, Faulkner in Oxford, and James Jones in Honolulu. And I would want to add, Didion herself for California. But what I found is that this isn't just a thing about place, it's a personal thing as well. So when I went back to Oregon and I was trying to see it for itself, the entire time I'm running into, the entire time I was trying to see Oregon, I was always seeing my experience with Oregon. And so what I'm trying to do in the book is explore the tension between those two things. And the essay I've chosen to read today is probably the one that gets at that most directly in a contained unit. So the essay I'm going to read is called "On the Gentle Sand Facing In, or How You Never Stop Becoming Who You Are." Ocean rain. The winter day is somber as the rain pulses hard and soft with the wind against my face. The gray majesty of the Pacific stretches before me, and I feel the wetness seep under my jacket and into my socks. It's all so familiar. What's not familiar as I walk the trail up from the beach to the town of Deerhawk is the inland view. The time seems right, we tell anyone who asks why we're getting married now, vaguely alluding to nothing in particular. If pressed, we'll move closer to the truth, adding something about wanting to formalize our relationship publicly for the friends and family we care so much about. Part of the way we see marriage is as a decision to live primarily not for each of us, but for us. And in the move from I to we is a move to the larger we of community, There's a duty we inherit to the traditions and conditions that bore us. Not a duty in the sense of an unwanted obligation, but duty as an opportunity to align who we are with the values we aspire to. And if that's an abstract way to frame love in our deepest earthly commitments, it's also a sincere way. The decision to marry made, practical questions remained. When, where, who to invite. Our best considerations eventually converged on a small ceremony on the beach, followed by several days visiting with friends and family who would join us in Gearhart. I called a rental agency and reserved the house at 138 North Ocean, the house that for over 30 years had been my family's. Longtime resident Millard Rosenblatt writes, Gearhart is like 75 years passed it by. I think Gearhart is the most remarkable place because it's so unchanged. The little changes that have occurred are relatively small compared to the rest of the world. I remember when it was impossible to imagine that Rosenblatt could ever be wrong in this assessment. I remember being young and looking forward to a future that would resemble my then present. The Portland I was born into, I could tell from an early age, would not be the Portland I'd grow up in or later return to. But Gearhart, I thought, would always be Gearhart. When a winter storm spectacularly reshaped the dunes, it was still the beach. When John Allen opened his cafe, there was still no McDonald's in town. When the Wiederhorn seized their own land from public use, it was, after all, their land. When Grandma Cookie died 7 years after Grandpa Steve, their house stayed in the family. My grandparents purchased their plot of land in Gearhart in the early 60s, then saved money so that when they eventually built a house there, they could pay cash for it. The house, completed in 1969 and painted a soft wooden gray that blended with the neighbors' homes and the sleepy quietude of the town, sat on the corner of First Street and Ocean Avenue. Which street names rightly indicate the choiceness of the location. Kitty Corner Southeast was a square block of open grass, where as kids, my cousins and I played soccer and frisbee and sometimes baseball. East of the park were 2 public tennis courts where we learned how to hit flat old tennis balls with our parents' warped wooden rackets. To the park's west, immediately south of the house, was an undeveloped tangle of shrubs and blackberry bushes, where we built forts connected by elaborate passageways that lasted the seasons. The land opened up to the tract of beach grass, a quarter-mile wide, dividing the city's growth boundary from one of Oregon's treasures, publicly owned beaches accessible to all running from Washington to California. For years, we cousins ran wild over the land, racing through the beach grass that poked our bare legs and arms as we made our way atop the highest bump between home and sea, a bump we christened Strawberry Hill, and from which we could see clearly south a few miles down the beach to Tillamook Head, the small mountain that runs directly into the ocean between Seaside and Cannon Beach. And we could see off into the northern distance as far as the day's cloud cover allowed. Sometimes in breaks from gray, miles and miles of blue against tan, or turning slightly to the left, a wall of blue where sky and sea never abutted, but merged to reveal for us one world reaching from some infinite horizon all the way back over the atmosphere we could breathe and feel cool against our faces and see actually from within. We were the sea those days. There was little time to enjoy the view, however, or reflect on our fortunes as the urge to play overwhelmed us. This was true back at the house as well, where the part of the basement that wasn't devoted to economic sleeping spaces was left for recreation. Pool, ping pong, darts, and board games. In the closet were 2 pairs of boxing gloves the 3 of us boys would take turns wearing to slug one another in the face until someone got a bloody nose, or the invisible line between boxing and fighting was crossed, and screaming, flailing rage broke loose. It might be half an hour after such a scene until we were sworn allies again. And in the meantime, we joined the neutral adult world upstairs. Nothing, no matter how painful, took very long at the beach to be made idyllic. Worries had a way of fading into the distance in Gearhart. Sandy and I met in college. It took me 2 years to get her to go out with me, but once she did, it was only a few months before we decided to move to Colorado together after graduation. I was never so eager to choose the future, sure as I was that it would include not replace the past. That same spring, my dad called me in Eugene to say that he and his siblings had decided it was time to sell the beach house. This disappointing news came to me as no surprise. We'd kept the house under joint ownership since my grandma died 9 years before, but it was becoming increasingly hard financially to maintain it. The house was in decent shape, but needed repairs and could stand some modernizing. No significant work or refurnishing had taken place on it since construction. Not needing to be in Colorado until August, I went to Gearhart in June to spend a month painting, gardening, ripping out carpet, and coordinating with contractors on some of the bigger repairs we wanted to make. Sandy, still living in Eugene at the time, drove out to meet me when she could. I showed her the changes to the house. We held each other close and looked out at the ocean, excited by what was before us. But there was a sadness in me too, a fear that it would never get any better than this. I can still feel the quiet emptiness of the house at summer dusk when the sunbeams angled through the western windows and little clouds of dust hung in the air. It's always September at these moments, always the end of something I want back. In my memory, I stare out and watch the sun go down, like it's gone down every time I've stood here before. I feel my grandmother's presence in these moments. The house has always felt like it belonged to her, like she was the only one in the family who could fill it up. She's sitting in the green swivel chair by the window, cracking a Diet Coke, watching me watch it all slip away again. She tells me that I'm young and that I should enjoy it because it's worth enjoying. I do enjoy it, I tell her, but it won't last. When are we ever not watching the sunset? You think too much, she says. I can't help it. The sun is resting in my eyes, then my heart, then my stomach, and part of me is still standing there, full of sun in a time that doesn't exist. You can think about life as an experiment. You run the trials, get the results, and recalibrate as necessary. The thing about life, though, is that not all experiments can be repeated. I wanted to marry Sandy at the family house as a way to unite past and future in the nexus of her and me. The union, of course, would prove that every harmony is itself the death of a solo and every song the death of silence. The experiment was to make it all come together in our own union, and the experiment failed. When I reserved our old house, it was spring, all was in color, cleared for a spotless future. When the property man called a few months later to say the new owner was tearing down the house to replace it with a larger one, and our reservation wouldn't be recognized, we were confronted by what we always knew. In our marriage, we'd be responsible for not relying on the past, but creating the conditions of our future. Practically speaking, Aunt Martha found us another house down the street from ours, big and beachfront. Sandy and I arrived in Gearhart the day before our wedding and walked up Ocean Avenue to where the family house had been. There we stared down into a pit of sliding sand, new foundation, only cursorily laid. I felt as empty as the hole, knowing exactly what had been taken away. But there was no reason to linger there. Our wedding was tomorrow and everything was up for grabs. The past has weight, but do I give the beach house more meaning than it had? How could I not? Back when our house stood, it was a place we enjoyed, but still a place. One among many, a fact as plain as any other. In its passing, it becomes so much more. It is now history, a necessary condition of the world as it is. Without it, there would have been no me, no this me. There is living, yes, but there is also having lived. I shudder at the inland view. The The McMansion that has replaced my family's home, simultaneously generic and ostentatious, sits large above the town, portending expansion and collapse all at once. The small footnote of my family seems erased from Gerhardt's history, but what I see from the beach ocean at my back, is not that we no longer exist as we did, but that history itself will be erased by forces larger still. The environment hums indifferently along, the windswept dunes reshaped by rising tides, the river winding like the trace of a snake across the summer sand, the weathered tennis courts demolished and rebuilt and demolished, time tearing away and replacing only itself. Thanks.
Okay, next we have Becky Mandelbaum, who's the author of Bad Kansas from the University of Georgia Press, 2017. And she's also the winner of the 2016 Flannery O'Connor Award for Short Fiction. And Pam Houston said, with heart and precision and a fresh and resilient humor, Bad Kansas reveals the lives of people that are living in that flyover state in a collection in which every sentence is made plain, never merely a vehicle for conveying information to the reader. With that,
Hello. My name is just like roll down. Thank you all for being here, and thanks to the book festival coordinators for organizing everything. It's kind of like crazy how many things are happening in all these different places. So thanks for all your work. Yeah, so this book, Bad Kansas, was basically, I was born and raised in Kansas, and then I went out to California for graduate school at the University of California, Davis, and I just hated it there a lot, which was surprising. And so suddenly I was writing all these stories about Kansas, which had not been my intention. But then I got this book, so I guess it worked out. And this story is very much a reflection of that feeling. I've never read this story out loud before, so this will be a first. It is called The Golden State. I'm skipping the first little bit. The only thing you need to know is that the narrator has just moved to what is essentially Davis with her older boyfriend, Alec. California was supposed to be better in every way. Better food, better weather, better people. In movies, the West Coast was a utopia of beaches and liberal politics, hippies high-fiving scientists at the farmer's market. Meanwhile, redwoods and cheap tacos in Yosemite. My Kansas friends feigned jealousy, although they too were heading out for other lands. Madrid, Seattle, a rustic lodge in the Rocky Mountains. Alec had his own campaign, whose main platform was that California was not Kansas. No snowstorms or tornadoes or governors trying to arm children with rifles. Plus, he'd gotten a job near Sacramento teaching French literature at a university. The job didn't pay well, but it was, back to his main point, not in Kansas. The university town was not by water or mountains, but somewhere vaguely between the Central Valley. It's the best of both worlds, Alec promised. He had promised many things over the course of our relationship, that he would only smoke cigarettes after sundown, that I could borrow his car without asking so long as I was sober, that he would love me ferociously. This was his word, ferociously. So far, he'd made good on everything, which I credited to his advanced age. He was 12 years older than me and had been my French teacher. Technically, he was a lecturer. He had his eyes on a tenure that would likely never be his, because as much as he wanted to be French, the truth was that his real name was Alex, and that he came from a poor farming town in upstate New York, where people ate pig's feet and married their first cousins. That his life and career were turning into something of a failure was entirely his problem, and yet sometimes it felt like my own. I just graduated with a degree in linguistics and couldn't think of anything better to do than follow him. What was a young woman supposed to do with her life? The answer probably should have been anything, everything. She's politically liberated. But something in my gut, perhaps fear masquerading as love, was urging me to stick with Alec. Plus, I had very little money. "You're making a big mistake," was what my mother told me. "But I'm in love," I said. "Love has weak legs," she said. "You'll see." I told her I'd prove her wrong, but I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. At this point, the doom feelings were already compacted into a small kernel located somewhere behind my belly button. Our house in the Central Valley cost 3 times more than the 1 bedroom we'd shared in Lawrence, and was, I should mention, not really a house. Granny cottage, they called it, whoever they were. At best, it was a room in which someone had accidentally left a sink in a toilet. At worst, it was an architectural side note to the larger 2-story mission-style home in which a history professor and a veterinarian lived with their litter of blonde offspring. We were there to help pay the mortgage. Inside, Alec's head scraped against the ceiling, where a network of cobwebs stretched from corner to corner like prayer flags. In the kitchen, I put out my arms and twirled like a ballerina, my fingers grazing the cabinets. There were 2 rooms, one of which was a bathroom. An image came to my mind of a mastiff and a dachshund forced into a gerbil cage. "Cozy," Alec said, and forced a smile that read, "Do not panic, or girlfriend will panic." I said, "As a womb or a very, very small, overpriced home." We got to work unpacking and ended up making okay, but sort of forced love on the kitchen linoleum. This is how we discovered the cockroaches. I'd never seen one up close before. Kansas had all sorts of critters, millipedes, brown recluses, cicadas, but nothing as Kafkaesque as a cockroach, like a rotted thumbnail with legs. "They say when the world ends, it'll just be all cockroaches and Twinkies," Alex said. He was naked, dust on his thighs. "Where do you want to be when the world ends?" I asked. He stared up at the ceiling, thinking, maybe the ocean, watching the waves. He turned to look at me. "What about you?" There was only one answer I could think of, and because I didn't know better, I figured it must be the truth. "I'd want to be right here," I told him, "with you." Sorry, my shoes are very squeaky. Alex started school, and I started researching the state of California, specifically the Central Valley. I had the time. The days had begun to stretch outward in all directions, expanding along with the cosmos. The mornings were temperate, but by noon the house was an inferno. There was no air conditioning unit, the house being not really a house, and so I grew to worship the monstrous box fan that stood by the window, whirring like a jet engine. At night, Alec grew damp with sweat, so that sleeping with him was like sleeping with a man-sized baked potato. My time in bed was spent wrestling with the sheets, dreaming of house fires and prairie burns. Most of my sleep came in the languid afternoons, when I'd fall into naps deep as miners' holes. When I woke up, startled by the sound of an ambulance or the feeling of sweat gliding across my stomach, I had to crawl my way back to reality, back to the scorching surface of my new life. My research paid off in a bad way. I learned that California was running out of water, that there were too many people compressed into too little space, too far from natural water sources. Even in Kansas, I'd been complicit. The production of a single California walnut required 5 gallons of water, and I like to eat my walnuts by the handful. I learned that the college town had played host to a series of freak tragedies: stranglings, decapitations, body parts saran wrapped and left in dumpsters. That part's true, unfortunately. Even nature seemed bent on retaliation. More than 4 people had died after driving into the same 80-year-old magnolia tree. Further research suggested that the tap water might cause organ cancer and that rabid bats roamed the treetops after sundown. Where, I wondered, had Alec brought me? Better question, why had I let him? That first week, Alec came home before dinner time, tired and grumpy. His office was hot, and the students were stupid. I thought this was supposed to be a world-class public university, I said. He brought a tub of mint chip ice cream from the freezer and hacked at it with a fork. He was on medicine that made him crave sugar. On more than one occasion, I caught him in bed at dawn, a salad bowl of Lucky Charms in his lap. They're just rich kids who want to stay rich, he said. All they really want to do is design drugs or build robots. They just need my class for the language credit. You're saying not one of them actually cares about learning new language? Something flickered in his eyes, a premonition of danger. There's one girl, he said. Her father's a diplomat. She already knows Italian and Spanish. It's like teaching a fish to drink water. A girl? He shoveled more ice cream into his mouth. Don't worry, she's probably gay. They're all gay here, or Marxist. I grabbed a tub of ice cream, brought it to my face, and licked the surface. Gross, Alex said, yanking the tub from me. What's the matter with you? It's mine, I said, pointing to the ice cream. Everything I touch is mine. He winced. Sometimes this happened. I played baby, he played dad. Have you thought about looking for a job yet? He asked. They're hiring at the cafeteria. I have a degree in linguistics. And my barista has a PhD in philosophy. Get over yourself. He stood and took the ice cream to the living room, which meant he relocated it about a yard east of the kitchen table. I want to take a class, I told him. I'm wasting my potential here. He did not look at me, but instead turned on the television. It's your life, he said. Do what you want. I decided that academia was stupid, and so I signed up for a woodworking class I planned to pay for with the rent money I would withhold from Alec. I'd recently read an article in the New Yorker about a novelist who claimed to have learned everything she needed to know about writing from her years laying brick in Indiana. Surely woodworking would open up some dusty cellar door in my soul, revealing a room of glittering treasure. The class was held in a Presbyterian church. I'd expected plaid-wearing 20-somethings, but the class was mostly old men and New Age moms. We started with introductions. When I said I was from Kansas, the class let out a collective coo, as if I'd been admitted to being a puppy with a serious case of kennel cough. You're sure not in Kansas anymore, one of the old men said. An invisible puppeteer gathered his wrinkles and pulled his face into a horrifying grin. We were starting with birdhouses. Our teacher was a middle-aged man with a red beard and hands like 2 T-bone steaks. He came up behind me and showed me how to sand down the edges of my wood. After inhaling his aftershave, I pressed my butt into the crotch of his blue jeans and closed my eyes, thinking all the while about the diplomat's daughter. Was she skinny? Blonde? Could she build a birdhouse out of scrap wood? The teacher cleared his throat and went to help one of the moms beside me. After class, he handed me my tuition check and said it'd be best if I didn't return. Prude, I thought, and ripped up the check. Outside, a boy from class was waiting near the curb. What'd you think? He asked. He was young, maybe my age, with a hipster mustache and a tan baseball cap that said Blue Horn Winery. Not for me, I said. I decided to quit. Same, he said. I already knew half the stuff anyways. I just figured it'd be a good way to meet people, you know? He smiled in a way that suggested I was the people. He then asked if I wanted to ride. A nearby bank sign read 104 degrees, so I followed him to his rusted Civic. A sticker on the bumper read Keep Tahoe Blue. Inside, something had eaten away a golf ball-sized hole in the floor, and as he drove, I watched the road go by between my feet. So are you digging it out here so far? He asked. I realized it was the first time anybody had asked me this. Even Alec had avoided the question, perhaps to avoid an answer that might require some action on his part. Not really, I said. I know that may be hard to imagine. Not at all, he said. I understand. You're homesick. I'm not homesick. Then what are you? I'm just not comfortable here. I'm not a Californian. Maybe you should go to the ocean, he said. That's what all the fuss is about. Check out Point Reyes if you get the chance. We were at the house already. He pulled over and let the car idle so that he could jot his name and number onto an in-and-out napkin. Theo was his name. I work the farmer's market if you're ever around, he said. I'm the honey man. Honey man, I said, that's sweet. He was blushing as I got out of the car. Inside, I put the In-N-Out napkin next to the toaster so that Alec would find it. The next day, I dropped Alec on campus and took his car to Point Reyes. The drive was all metal and tension. Aside from the traffic, the road kept curving and expanding and turning into bridges. In Kansas, you could close your eyes and take your hands off the wheel, count to 15 Mississippi. I found a trailhead and walked a handful of miles until the Pacific appeared on my left. Holy shit, I thought, that doesn't end until Japan. There was blue water and wheat-colored sand and cliffs taller than the tallest building in Wichita. Land I now saw was like pie. Who would settle for just the middle when the crust was the whole point? I felt bad for Kansas then, that everything in it was the same. Land, land, land. The occasional mosquito-infested watering hole. And then me, my family, all my history, everyone I'd ever loved. If there was a map that glowed in the places where I'd loved and been loved, it would burn bright in the center, surrounded by darkness. I scrambled down the trail to a waterfall. This close to the water, I felt the first inkling of claustrophobia. It occurred to me that the openness of the sea was a lie. The ocean was not space, it was the opposite of space. It was a wall, a cage, a no man's land promising imminent death. Nearby, a group of people had congregated around a beached seal. It took me a while to realize that something was wrong with the seal. It was craning its neck in a sickly way, as if trying to break itself in half. Without warning, it began to convulse. White foam streamed from its mouth as quickly and voluptuously as soft serve. It was going to die, and these people were going to watch it. It's having an orgasm, a young man yelled. Around him, the women squealed in joyful disgust. One raised her phone to take a picture. Leave it alone, I wanted to shout, but had the ridiculous suspicion that they would turn to me and know I was from Kansas. You're not even from here, someone would say, probably the kid wearing a pink bandana. This is just how we do things. It's ocean stuff. You wouldn't understand. Later that night, Alec laughed when I told him the story. We just made love and were in bed, face to face. He'd been sweet that evening, making lasagna for dinner and then massaging my feet. After dessert, we unpacked a box of candles and lit them in the bedroom. It smelled like our apartment in Lawrence, vanilla and mint. In many ways, it was the best night we'd had in the house yet. Your friends used to shoot squirrels with pellet guns, he reminded me. You didn't find them morally bankrupt. That's different, I said. These people at the beach, they were malicious. And anyways, those guys used to make squirrel stew. Squirrel stew is not a thing. I'm telling you, I said, they made stew. They weren't killing for sport. All right, your friends made stew. Either way, you just hate the people here because you think you're tougher than them. I do not. You do too, he said. You think they're soft because they eat avocados and go surfing, and like you're some hardened warrior just off the Oregon Trail. None of that's true, I said. I regretted raising my voice. I wanted to stay nice, for the evening to retain its kind trajectory. The mint candle was still burning on the nightstand, casting a friendly orb of light onto the wall. Help me, candle, I thought. I'm losing him. Have you discussed any of this with the napkin man? Alec asked. My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten about the napkin, about Theo. I wanted to undo it, to take it back and throw it in the trash. I don't know anything about a napkin man, I said. You don't know anything about that napkin on the counter? I do not. Did you think I wouldn't call the number? He looked at me hard, unblinking. You fuck with me and I'll fuck with you back. The words made my throat ache. That's not a nice way to talk to the one you love. I'm tired, he said, turning away from me. Some of us went to work today. I held my tongue and pressed my fingernails into my palms. It's okay. That's just awkward because it's the end of the story right now. I'll read the last line. I held my tongue and pressed my fingernails into my palms, where they left little frowns of pain. And it's actually not the end of the story, but I'm going to stop there.
Next we have Bernard Quetchenbach, who's the editor of the Bunchgrass Motel, the collected poems of Randall Loge, sorry. And I will let him tell you more about the book, and it's also in the back for sale. There are copies if you would like a copy. Yeah.
So I'll tell you a little bit about Randall. I'm going to read a couple of poems from here, and then I'm going to read a couple of short prose passages from a different book that I wrote. And I think I can probably speak more directly to my own sense of place than I can for Randall's. Randall died in 2014. He was a colleague of mine, and he left behind a number of lifetimes worth of poetry that we were able to get published. And so, anyway, University of Montana Press published his collection. Randall spent his whole life in Montana, with the exception of some time he spent in the Navy and a brief stay in Ohio. He was born in Helena, he grew up in Miles City, and spent most of his life in Billings. So he has a very strong sense of particularly of southeastern Montana. Some of his poems are about the Pacific Northwest, but really his life was in the Yellowstone River Valley and thereabouts. So I'm going to read a couple poems, one of which, this first one, gives you, I think, a pretty good sense of Randall's world. And it's called In a Cold Grown Yellow Green. Each by the other proven, black-winged traces a high west wind come from blue mountains, while the wind conjures a raven. Against late winter sun, above flat snow and stubble field, red road and fence posts and cold grown yellow green. So the Bunchgrass Hotel itself, Bunchgrass Motel rather, is a series of kind of character sketch poems, and I imagine them as taking place in a place that's very much like Miles City as it was in the time of World War II. So, this one is called The Day Jeremy Lost Track of Time. And there's a lot of place references in here, and you can kind of really put together a place that's part imaginary and part Randall's real growing up environment. Tired of eyeing ants dismantling an earthworm on the playground at Meadowlark School in the vicinity of the monkey bars, Jeremy got up from a low crouch, shaking the dust off his pants, stepping out deliberately at first, foot after foot after foot, gauging his pace by cement sidewalk squares, crossing a tar-sticky street, accelerating by a gray stucco house with window boxes full of wild roses, by a milkweed vacant lot, fence lines, brittle cottonwoods, an alleyway, faster and faster, a big white wood-framed duplex whizzed by, the football practice field appeared, then disappeared, blending into a hint of the pink mortuary. Arrowroot High School flickered into history. Almost up to speed, he felt whole neighborhoods blur, houses just washes of color, trees dust devils in the wind. Careering past the Bunchgrass Motel, he avoided the viaduct with a hard right onto State Highway 114. As his feet left the ground, Jeremy became a flying fortress on a mission, droning into the summer sun. So I'm going to read a couple short passages from a prose collection of essays, and if I have time at the end, I'll finish off with another of Randall's poems. This book, Accidental Gravity, sort of focuses on two different places. The first part of it focuses on where I grew up, in upstate New York, but not the part where you married your first cousin, right? In western New York. And that I know of anyway, maybe. And the second part is about the Yellowstone River Valley, where I've spent my last, in Yellowstone area, where I've spent my last 12 or 13 years. So, let's see. Yeah, these wheelchairs are really interesting, right? I mean, you have the sense that your wheelchair would be like zooming around the room, pointing at properties and stuff like that. So this is a series of This is a series of vignettes about rivers, and this is the beginning of that. Actually, it's a little off beginning, but it's very close. The Genesee, my first river, was shallow but strong-willed at Quetchenbach, not many miles above a series of plunges into Letchworth Gorge. Once, Charlie, who's mentioned earlier, had to shout awake a placid boatload riding the flow toward the Grand Canyon of the East, but the current was manageable if you paid attention, and the water wasn't too high. Like it must have been the day it gouged out half of Otis Smith Road south of Charlie's unassuming cabin, Kishkatuk House, meaning in some unspecified indigenous language, house by the river. From Fillmore, the dirt road named for Smith, no one seemed to know who he was, wound along the Genesee, then clambered over a hill and down past Charlie's brother's place, and later the modern-day homestead where Don Outerson raised his varnished walls, threatened Thoreau-like to catch and eat the neighborhood woodchuck, and concocted his elaborate homebrews, snaking hops up power poles, mixing in mayapple for mandrake mead. A wooded ridge, hickory, maple, beech, the haunt of grouse and whitetails, maybe a fisher or two, backed off the valley floor, rising steadily behind the makeshift settlement. Across the river, sycamores screened a cornfield. The bottomland farms were small enough to be unobtrusive, though once in a while the river's voice had to compete with the putt and clang of an unseen tractor or the whine of a distant chainsaw. On moonlit winter nights, my friends and I hiked through snow to ridgetop railroad tracks, and sometimes on summer weekends we scrambled up tributary waterfalls or just sprawled like Ozark postcard hillbillies in front of the house, watching things happen on the river, an osprey drifting by, say, or swallows of various species zipping back and forth, or someone getting sunburned in a rowboat to the subliminal music of toads. On early summer evenings, mayflies whirled in eddies at the surface of the blue opposite the sunset deepened. Then nighthawks spun patterns here and there across the water, a silent net broken only by their occasional tooth buzz. The same Genesee pawed into Rochester, my hometown, as a heavy trunk stream, passing squatters' cabins at the Ballantine Bridge, then slipping between abandoned mills and dropping through Three Falls into its second bonus gorge, emerging broader, deeper still at its mouth, dredged first for shipping, later for marina traffic. I would zigzag out the Shallop Pier from side to side, now the lake, now the river, finally the foghorn, where the river's journey ends, or where it begins the bigger, slower drift that tends northeast toward the St. Lawrence. And the last river is the Yellowstone, and the last one I'm going to look at anyway. There's a reference to a place called Powell, which is Powell, Wyoming, where it also appears earlier in the essay, so that's just at the beginning. 100 miles north of Powell, and more than a decade later, abutments of the low bridge that escorts South Billings Boulevard across the Yellowstone River carry generations of suggestive but corny high school graffiti. Butter my muffin. Splattered against chipped concrete. The trail from Riverfront Park to Norm Shainthal's Island ducks under the bridge, emerging into Plains cottonwoods starkly etched against gray winter sky. Golden ice scull along ice edges, then take off upstream to ride again down to island bars where bunches of Canadas and a few mergansers lays. A young bald eagle makes a dark splotch in the leafless cottonwoods. Where the path hooks along the stray braid of river that defines Norm's Island, a golden eye, perhaps tired of playing the river, floats serenely in an ice-free bend. The most obvious feature here is a cacophony of crows, some gathered in the trees, others huddled in enclaves among the Canadas, which are twice as big and equally assertive as the corvids. Norm's Island is part of a network of county and city parks, popular recreation spots, and flood basins during high runoff. The distant beartooths loom on clear days, but the deciduous woods and lush beaver troughs give the river bottom land a vaguely mid-continental feel, with small herds of white-tailed deer, the exuberant flash of redstarts, the relentless summer buzz of cicadas. One cloudy spring day, a few sandhill cranes joined the gulls and geese on a gravel bar. It could have been Nebraska. But what it really is river, a country of its own wedged between prairie, mountain, and badland, a place of tall trees shielding mysterious cabins on tenuous islands, fugitive holdfasts strung inevitably downstream, only marginally more provisional than those shacks below the Valentine Bridge in Rochester. Catching a quick respite in the Billings City Park, it's easy to forget that the Yellowstone is the last undammed major river in the lower 48. Undammed is a relative term, with irrigation canals borrowing water for fields and towns scattered along the valley. One of those ditches slinks through my neighborhood, fringed with a tangle of summer green like a misplaced bayou. Empty and forlorn in winter, a few mallards waiting patiently in persistent mud. Downstream from Billings, diversion structures stymie migrating pileated sturgeons, but their effect on the overall flow is limited, and the Yellowstone is spared the evaporating reservoirs and resulting stranded senescent cottonwood groves that plague other western rivers. Having already picked up Clark's Fork with Bighorn, Tongue, and Powder rivers to join downstream, the Yellowstone and Billings flashes the vigor of early Middle Age. Trout make room for channel cats. By Miles City, there will be paddlefish, ancient denizens of the continent's deep, inexorable center. Freighted with the wilderness legends and city stories of plains tribes, explorers, trappers, ranchers, outlaws, sodbusters, miners, shopkeepers, empire builders, even college professors, the Yellowstone joins the Missouri just across the North Dakota line. On a map of North America, Big Muddy arcs gracefully across the continent like the grandest bow in the Mississippi's live oak crown. So I'll finish with one more of Randall's poems, and this one is right here. It's called Move as They Yellow, and again it gives you a sense of Randall's sense of his own surroundings. Come, take the sun's speed through translucent wheat, thresh out weathered seed, its virulent heat. Assume the one sure example, recall the fields and endure this reaping of all. Move as they yellow, these sudden acres of stunned grass, those slow somnolent breakers blown from over lean earth. Move as they must move, inch on inch from birth. Held that light might prove the raw sheaves, the hiss of hard final grain from puffed chaff. That this profusion might reign triumphant in space, instantaneous, rooted in fixed place, caught impervious in the granary of the standing mind. Be as they will be, ruthlessly designed to continue, free of all but land. Mold from the still grimy stalks, a stubborn gold. Thank you.
Kisha, Lewellyn, Schlegel, sorry. And she is the author of Fear Icons, which came out this year from Mad Creek Books. Who are we to each other when we're afraid, she asks in this moving and original debut essay collection. Her answer is a lyric examination of the icons that summon and soothe our fears. From Donald Trump to the Virgin Mary, Darth Vader to the Dalai Lama, she turns cultural criticism personal with bracing intelligence and vulnerability.
Thank you. Hi. Hello. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to my wonderful panelist friends for reading forwarding to these locations. This is like looking out at faces of love. So I might start crying. I'm not going to look at you. I also want to thank Berkshire Hathaway, which is not a sentence I ever thought I would say, so thank you very much. And thank you, Missoula, for being in my heart always. Okay, so when I get nervous, which I am, in case you can't tell, I write things down. So I just wrote a little introduction to what I'm going to do today. Okay. This is the first time I've read from this book. It comes out October 8th, so there are not copies here. It was possible that there were going to be copies, but they didn't make it. But as I understand it, you can do something called pre-ordering. Who knew? From Shakespeare and Company, and that evidently is really great for authors. Also did not know that before. So do that thing if you would like. Okay, Fear Icons is a collection of essays that consider fear through different cultural icons like Bin Laden, Ozzy Osbourne, Darth Vader. And when I say I wrote through these icons, I mean that I did not write about them. These essays aren't profiles of subjects, and they aren't explanations or a means by which to get over fear. They are attempts to stay with fear and with the iconic figures that prompt and soothe those fears in order to ask, who are we to each other when we're afraid? In other words, as the writer Renee Gladman once said, I'm a prose writer excited by how language passes through places, the mind, out the body, across the page, through thought or description. The same is true for me when I think of place. Rather than write about it, I try to write through place. An example, just yesterday, I drove the Nez Perce Trail over Lolo Pass to see that the large trees are just beginning to turn. They are, at this moment, a spring green. Something I'd never seen this before. And yet my first thought in that moment was, larch? Why did I call them larch trees? What's the name my Missoula friend used to use? I couldn't think of it, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't until I was in Missoula with friends that the word came to me last night. Tamarack, of course, tamaracks. The word came through the place, which includes the people, of course. So what words might come through the place if I stay with it? Rather than entering into my own formations of what I want to make out of that landscape, rather than think about what I can make from a place, I'm interested in asking, how can I be with a place? How can I, as a white woman who has benefited greatly without trying from systems of oppression, take nothing more from the earth and its people, but listen to it, be with it? As a writer, I'm not interested in mining. I'm interested in putting my ear to the ground and listening. So here's another example of what I mean when I say I write through place. It's an essay from Fear Icons, and it's called The Dalai Lama's Sharks. This is like patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. Okay. The Dalai Lama's Sharks. One thing to know about this, which you can't see, is that it's all one long paragraph. So if you start to feel like it's all one paragraph, you're right. It's just all flowing together. In the water, I'm meditation with teeth. I'm human, but a leaf. I float in waters that aren't mine. The swimming pool belongs to my mother's friend. My body belongs to me. But it's not mine either. It grows without me, adolescent. It hurts, and then offers me the kindest feeling, as when a drop of cold water warms on my skin, or when a small leaf that has been floating on the skin of the water sticks to my arm. I don't notice it for a long time. The leaf rests on my arm, like any other arm, able to feel good and do good, be harmed and do harm. I float and feel expansive, not safe. Something internal, a kidney, or the water that moves through my body, pulls me toward the bodies of water that move the body of this earth. Only my head is heavy. My brain is in there. I struggle to keep my mouth and nose above the surface. I want to keep my face at the level of the sea. The sea speaks in feeling. If I open my ears, I'll hear it. I'll know my ears as ears. I'll be able to call my throat the throat. I feel the throat loosen. The tongue falls away from the roof of my mouth. The eyes soften and close or don't. Who cares? It doesn't matter. When a thought comes, welcome it, then let it float away. The mind wanders and goes deeper inside. Inside of what? I feel pain behind my knee and turn to a place in my body that feels good. The earlobe, where it meets my jaw. Does it meet my jaw? Is that my jaw? I never want to see my bones. I don't have heavy muscles. I float easily. The layers of fat that keep me warm in the winter buoy me in summer. My body eats and becomes food. I'm a carnivore, but a plant. Once a week I photosynthesize in this pool. Then I dive. Nothing stops me. Even after I get a perm, and I'm told not to get it wet, I get it wet. The strands straighten back out. I've done a bad thing with my body, but I feel so good. I'm in water with my hair loose behind me like tentacles. My legs fuse, and I dive through the water, tender with kindness and threat, of drowning, of rough concrete that skins the sole of my foot, of the sunburned white boy who dives in to swim after me, while our mothers spread their hips into the lounge chairs beneath the Georgia sun.
that stacks freckles onto their freckles. He comes after me. He comes for my feet and my legs and my body, which he wants for his own, when my body is not yet my own. I don't know how to face his sad desire. I dive into the pool's deep end, where a grate sucks down dirty water to filter out the floating skin cells and bacteria and chlorinate the water back to its false tropical blue. I wrap my fingers around the grate and hold tight. My lungs suffer. How long can they wait? I release one air bubble at a time, fighting the buoyancy of my body, its interminable desire to rise when I want to stay deep and hidden. I don't look to see if the boy's feet are dangling above. It doesn't matter. My body is beginning to inhale. I push off the concrete. My feet launch me upward with the power of a grown man, all muscle, all heat, all do not fuck with me. I'm going to surface in time to take the breath I need. I don't remember if the boy was there when I surfaced, but my body remembers. The dive let me escape. The response lodged in my body, in the muscles, and the little almonds of the brain called amygdalae. Whenever I'm afraid, they flood me with adrenaline and cortisol. I feel beyond what is seen and heard. When I'm afraid, my body surprises me like a poem. Even the Dalai Lama boards a transatlantic flight and gets a bolt from the blue. He fears most that he will survive the plane crash. And, having never learned to swim, will sink into a careless ocean and watch as his body is, quote, enjoyed by a shark, end quote. He says the word shark and giggles. It's a sweet little giggle. So nice. He laughs with his body made of meat. I hear his words and I'm standing again at the edge of a boat, wearing a blue bikini for the first time, a color so absorbed by the sea and the Key West sky that I'm a cliche. My friend and I pay for the snorkel tour and ride the boat out to the coral reef. It's a slow, methodical ride. Waves kick the side of the boat. The air tastes of salt and sunscreen. The guide stops the engine. He hands us snorkels that fill our mouths with long serrated tubes that turn every face into a creature without category. It takes 2 words to reveal who we are, a keening kind of creature, so human animal. You, he says, pointing to me, jump in first. My feet are flippers. I flop to the edge of the boat, clumsy at first, then capable. Look how my body learns. I stand at the lip of the deck and look down. 5 large animals form a circle. Jump there, he points to the hole between them. I can see their teeth. I spit out the snorkel. Are they smiling? I ask. He shrugs. Barracuda. They smile. It's creepy. Until this moment, the word barracuda has only been a song to me, first released by a band called Heart. I only remember the chorus. Ooh, barracuda. Oh yeah. I can't seem to feel my fingers or arms. A shadow moves below the barracuda. Was that a shark? The guide doesn't look. Sure. The shark passes again with knives for fins, with its body made of cartilage instead of bone, bending like my human ear that will decompose when I die and be gone. The sun shines on the bait of my skin. Someone else can go first, I say, shoving the snorkel back into my mouth, so I won't have to answer for myself. I step away from the edge, only to feel my body moving forward without me, propelled by a single hand on my back, pushing me into the water. Go, my friend says. My best friend. Leanne. She pushes me and I fall. The flippers slap the surface of the water and slow my descent. I sink between the fangs of barracuda smiles, but what I really see is the shark in the near distance. A shadow shaped like a boneless cross. It grows. Closer. I surface. The strangers on the boat clap at me. You're in now, yells my friend, that beautiful pusher. She pops in her snorkel and steps to the edge. I hold up my hand, but my snorkel swallows my warning. Stop, help, I'm afraid. She jumps. The guide turns away. The others begin to drop their bodies off the side of the boat like lemons. Plop, plop. We're all in, together now. My body bobs in the waves their bodies make. Through the distorted surface of the clear water, my legs curve unnaturally. My feet hang like worms from the hooks of my legs. They find their kicking muscles and take me down. I dive into the water, past the circling of smiling barracudas, down and back. I'm a girl again. I'm a fish. I'm not thinking of the boy who chased me. My muscles hold that memory at the ready. My little almonds move me without thinking. Down I go through fear, a feeling that passes through a body with such speed that for a long time it was believed to be a contagious disease. While most of London died in 1655 from the plague, 23 died from pure fright. Just believing a man was sick caused another to fall down dead. Everyone was encouraged to practice calm, even if they didn't feel it, as they passed through a terminal landscape that passed through them. I passed through water, passed through rush sharks. I passed through glades of teeth. I stop. I try to be still in a second, as long as history. There's no stable orientation down here, other than my body of connective tissue and ears and mouth and blood. My pores fill with the receptive jelly found in the shark's ampullae, those small pockmarks that register invisible electric fields made by the contracting muscles of nearby animals. All the jellies and starfish, the amoebas, and all the Earth's first organisms that formed here before growing gills and fins and legs that walked onto land, all the birds before wings, the bears before legs, all beings formed deep in the body of the sea. Here, we first learned that fear is a form of intelligence. It's an ancient mouth in the brain that cries help. Even when no one's around, we call out. This is no act of futility. It is a reminder that we believe in love. That someone out there loves you. Enough to listen for your call. Maybe God, maybe Mother, maybe God. Here's life again in the form of thought. Help. Here's the shark, vibrating death with her teeth. The shark swims toward me, only to pitch down. The shadow cross of its body sinks away from me into the dark. I swim up to the light. My body surges to the surface. My mouth spits out the snorkel to fill each patient lung with air. My body turns belly up like a palm to the sun. I move with the ripples. If anyone were to fly over in a plane, they wouldn't see me here. They would see a glint on the wave, a broken shell, a stomach with wings, ancient, a single thought reaching back to the beginning, when I shared this ocean with you. Thanks.
All right, now we'll open it up for any questions. If you guys have anything you'd like to talk about. No questions? Or do the authors have anything they would like to ask about?
I was wondering, what made you, oh,
What made you decide to write it all as one paragraph?
I wanted to evoke the feeling of meditation, the sort of rambliness that happens when you meditate, but also the connectivity of the ocean, how it's just sort of one big thing, even though we call it different oceans. And so those were two things that were influencing the form for me.
Well, I just have a comment for you, Kisha. I lived in Key West for a long time. You really capture what it's like to go diving on a day when you're not quite sure who you are or where you are. You really
I have a question about place. Because I'm not from Montana, even though I live here, and I've lived here for a long time, I can't capture the place easily when I write, but I can capture Kansas. I can capture the flatlands. I can capture the wind in the wheat. I can capture the pheasants crossing the road and the red-winged bird, red-winged blackbird squawking because you dared walk past it. So when you talk about place, I heard California, I heard Oregon. What is it about your writing that gives it a place other than just saying, hi, I'm in California, hi, I'm in Oregon, or hi, hello, I'm in Montana? What language do you use to take us to that place?
I heard Oregon come up, so.
Okay, well, I'll give it a shot then. The longest piece in my book is it's really a collection of prose poems. It's about 50 prose poems, each tied to a specific location in Oregon. So, everywhere from one corner of the state to another. And so it would be hard for me to answer that question in the general place because each one would feel specific to the particular place. So, I could just pick one out, first one I open to, and read it as an example. And then maybe that'll kind of be an answer. Let's see. Okay, so here's the Lewellyn River. Up early to head generally onward. Got down into the 40s last night and brought on a feeling of fall's onset. I've been driving through mountains and canyons, and along this river I'm now sitting by, listening to the light, constant rush of one moment leading to the next as the sun rises warm on the left side of my body. I remember everything. What I'm trying to do, at least, is just to be present in the place and the time I'm in, and just be receptive to the experience of being there. So just to say again, I don't know how to generalize from that. There's a lot of trees, there's a lot of mountains, rivers, locations in Portland. You're looking at me like you want.
Well, there's internal and there's external. You can be having an internal journey anywhere in the world, and that can be very interesting, whether you're in China or whether you're in Oregon. So, but when you mention certain uses of water, I'm certainly not in Bend. I'm probably in the West. So you use the landscape as part of what you're writing about, and you have to describe it in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm wondering if all y'all rely upon visual images, or also the rushing of water, or the taste of water, or the smell of water. Because although I'm not really fond of water, I can tell you that the water, it's seawater, smells very different than a pond in Kansas. There's a different smell to it. So how do you bring me to a place is by describing it, and I don't know what words you use to describe it, but I mean place, a place in time or place whatever.
I wonder if you would be so kind as to reread Didion's quotation that you started with as a possible answer.
Yeah, sure, I can reread it. She writes, "A place belongs forever to whoever claims it hardest, remembers it most obsessively, wrenches it from itself, shapes it, renders it, loves it so radically that he remakes it in his own image." Anyone else can jump in there though, but yeah.
I don't know if I entirely understand your question, but I'm just gonna talk and see if anything happens. It is weird to write about a place because I think that there's very two separate things going on, and one of them has to do with geography and imagery and like the concrete things that anyone has access to. And then I think another component of it is like the stories and the culture and the people and the feelings, like the intangible aspects of a place. I don't know if y'all feel the same way as I do, but I find the second one more interesting than the first. And that usually, I think that the Didion quote is, I'm glad that you asked for that to be repeated, because I think she gets close to it when she talks about people who are obsessed with a place. And in her work, a lot of the times, it's not necessarily about the way California looks or, you know, its topography. It's about the people and what's going on there, and her assessments of those mini cultures. Yeah, I don't know. I think place has very little to do with the geography a lot of the times. It's sort of just like whatever. The geography affects it, but when I think of places, like when I leave Montana, I'm gonna remember the mountain. Like the other night it was glowing, it was like insane color. I don't know how many people here are from Missoula, but it's so pretty here. But yeah, so like that's part of it, but it's also like the conversations with people and the way everyone dresses, and you know, like there's so many things at play.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying, because when I'm in Portugal, it's not merely the architecture, it's not merely the landscape, it's the pastel de nata, it's the porco alentejano, it's the food, it's the language, it's much more than just a physical landscape. If I'm talking about herring for breakfast, I'm probably talking about Norway, I'm not talking about Missoula. If I'm talking meat and potatoes, damn it, where's my meat and potatoes? Then I might be talking about Missoula. I hang around with a whole bunch of old people. Where's my meat? Where's my potatoes? You know, so you can use other aspects of the culture to take you to a place.
I think the woman behind you was raising her hand also.
Yeah, I was wondering if, because you're writing fiction, if that allows you to access place in a different way than if you were writing nonfiction, if that creates some distance, and I guess it's also a question for Kisha in taking that one paragraph form, doing something with the craft, if that allows you to come at place in a different way, I guess.
Yes. I don't know, I think I feel like it's sort of a chicken and egg thing. Like if I wasn't as interested in the stories and the sort of psychological aspect of writing, I would be more driven to poetry, which I used to like more. I don't know, so, but I think if I was to write a poem, it would still, like a poem about Kansas, it would be very people-based still. Yeah.
I think too, it's like this cycle between place and form, especially for this essay, but others as well. I mean, and also that happens thematically too, right? Like if I'm writing about grief and I'm trying to fragment time, then the essay becomes more fragmented and sort of populated by these images and sort of accrete over time. I mean, that's the work of the lyric essayist too, which is the sort of mode I'm working in. Sort of living between the poem and between the essay, which is the lyric essay. So yeah, and I think too, the other thing is, you know, any description is going to reveal the speaker. Like that's actually what's being revealed, no matter what you're describing, even if you had herring in Portugal, like that's actually, you're describing the self when you do that, even if the I is never present. So that's what's really interesting too about place, is the ways in which we write about those places are revealing of us as seers, as sensory people in the world who hear and see and think certain things. Yeah.
I think Montana is particularly self-conscious in its regard for place. I mean, if I'm writing about upstate New York, it's easy because it's a kind of an open slate and nobody really knows that much about it. But you know, every time somebody runs for office in Montana, they have to be more Montana than the other guy, right? You know, and so there's this sort of barrier to the direct experience. Am I experiencing the place that I'm in, or am I experiencing the legend of the place that I'm in? And that can make it more difficult, I think, to become but conversant with the spirit of a place like Montana. So, yeah.
I didn't get your name, but you on the end. You described a place that you really can't go back to, you know, your historical, your grandmother's house, and when you go back now, how do you feel?
Gosh, I haven't actually been back to where the house used to be since, you know, what I described in the essay. So there's not much I can add for that one. I mean, I guess mostly, you know, you're confronted with loss, you're confronted with temptation toward nostalgia that I think, you know, you try to resist, but are, you know, struggle with that as your, you know, particular, you know, sensibility demands. But yeah, you know, I go there, I have good memories. I feel sad, you know, I feel like something, not just for me personally, but something has been lost in the community there just because of the way this house is so obscene that is there now. But, you know, such is the way. I live in Bozeman now, so you know what I'm gonna say. And I've been in Bozeman for 3 years, so
I'd like to know where you live now.
I live in a very small town in western-ish Washington, Skagit Valley. It's the town next to the town next to North Cascades National Park. So it's I'm dating a seasonal worker, so we move a lot. Yeah. So I think about place obsessively because I move often and have to encounter new spaces and miss old spaces, and yeah. I'm kind of wanting to move to Missoula now.
You know, there's a t-shirt about Missoula that says, a place sort of.
On the far other side of Montana, you can get in Ekalaka, you can get a T-shirt that says "End of the world, 5 miles, Ekalaka 8."
Somebody else?
Yeah. Question. This is stemming from a question for Kisha that is for all of you. And your reading, Kisha, I was really stupefied and moved by moving from body to place and back to body, and the boundarylessness of those movements. And I was wondering if you and everyone could talk to, or if you'd be willing to talk to fluidity between person and place.
I think that's close to what I was trying to say earlier too, right? Like when I describe something, it's revealing of me, of who I am and my sensory perceptions, which are of the body, yeah? And I think the structure for this essay being one paragraph helped with that fluidity, right? Adds some connectivity in easy ways on the page. There's no white space breaking up any of those parts to make them discrete from each other. But it's funny because I also rewrote this essay probably 50 times. This book took 8 years to write. So in one of the iterations, I literally drew a picture of me jumping off the boat and the sharks are like in the bottom, and like I almost brought it because it's so funny now to me. Because I was really aiming for that fluidity that you're speaking of, that boundlessness between these two bodies of water. So how can I then enact that on the page in a unified paragraph, but also using the word body to refer to the water, of course. There's some actual language things I'm doing there to make those connections too. But yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up. I like to think about I think we forget about our bodies a lot and how they know a lot more than our brains sometimes do. So the place where I live in Washington is very, there's a lot of trees and they're very tall and it feels very closed in. And I'm from Kansas, so it's interesting. Every time, like even the drive out here, when the land opens up, I feel it so severely in my body. And I think that's something that we can't, there's something going on there that I haven't lived in Kansas in a long time. Not that long, like 4 or 5 years. But it's so ingrained in me still to prefer open spaces. And I know there's people like that who are the opposite. And when they're in the mountains and they're tucked in, like in the valley where I live, that feels safe to them. So yeah, I think that our bodies remember place just as much as our actual memories do. Yeah, I thought your essay was very interesting in that way, just thinking about the relationship and the boundaries. But I didn't really make a point, but yeah.
Well, because that's what fear does, right? Fear is totally embodied before we have the thought, I'm afraid. It's there for us.
When you're writing poetry, you can't really, you're always aware of the body because you're dealing with rhythms and you're dealing with sound. And even placement of the words on the page becomes a different kind of visual experience than with prose, where it's sort of, those things are more subtle. You write short paragraphs, long paragraphs, but when you have a big open field. So poetry, I think, is physical in a sort of inherent kind of way, but you can also try to make prose more body conscious by considering sentence rhythms and things like that order that are operative.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has anything.
So the one I like to ask is if you could talk briefly about the next project you might have in the works right now.
I'm gonna learn how to read without crying and freaking out. That's my project. Thank you.
I didn't even know that I can't see you, so I didn't know you cried.
I didn't
I
actually.
heard you
It was
choke
close.
up, and
Right, we were close.
I didn't enhance it. I'm currently finishing up revisions on the novel that hopefully will come out in like 2020-ish. It's set on an animal sanctuary in western Kansas during the 2016 election, so also very place-based.
I have a number of small projects, but the one I'm working on right now is a little bit bizarre. Terrain Journal, it's an online journal. It has a series called Letters to America, and I find myself writing a letter to America, but actually I'm writing a letter to Thomas Jefferson. So, he's been waiting this long.
Okay, if everyone agrees not to tell my family, I'm working on a memoir about Father